What I'd done had obviously affected him because he didn't come back to work on the divorce. I was happy about it and considered it my first real attack in the battle for my husband. Little did I know, my attack was ill-timed and it cost me the war. When Tanya came over later that day, she came over every night after work by then. Lucas must have said something to her. She came up to the house and knocked on the door. It was the first time she'd ever done that. "Lucas isn't up here," I began, before she launched in on me. "You witch," she snapped at me. "You need to keep your goddamn clothes on around Lucas. Isn't that what caused you to lose him in the first place?" "No," I said, smiling. "First off, please remember that I haven't lost him yet. Second, it wasn't taking my clothes off around Lucas that lost him, Missy. It was taking my clothes off around other men, and I don't do that anymore." She was so mad she blew her hair out of her eyes and glared at me and then just stalked away. I was sure she'd try to do something to get back at me. I smiled because she was so pissed. I knew that I'd finally done something to score some points. I was in the game, or so I thought, from talking to Lucas and just knowing the way he is, but also from listening to the things he said about her. I knew that they weren't having sex yet. They were just messing around like teenagers while they got to know each other. You don't spend years with a man and not know him. I guess it's the same way that Lucas was able to tell the sheriff whether or not I was telling the truth. I knew that Lucas wanted to get the divorce taken care of so quickly so that he and Little Miss Deputy could be together. They were both honorable enough to wait for our divorce to be final to sleep together. When Tanya walked away from me that night, she was mad enough to chew nails. I laughed as she walked away without realizing the damage I'd done. The next morning, Lucas returned to our makeshift bargaining table, and I knew right away that things were different. He was my Lucas all over again. He was cheerful and smiling for the first time since he caught me in the motel. It was like my actions had deflated his soul, and something had breathed life back into him. I noticed that he knocked, and this time he didn't bother to wait for me to invite him in. He just knocked and came on in. I mistakenly thought that he was trying to catch another glimpse of me naked. My mind can leap to the wrong conclusion at the speed of light. Figuring out when I've screwed up takes significantly longer, though. I quickly decided that yesterday's peek at my naked form had excited Lucas so much that he wanted more. Unfortunately, I had a nightgown on. If I'd had the chance, I'd have taken it off, but at least the neckline was cut very low. My dugs were hardening even as Lucas set my breakfast down. As he looked away to get my coffee cup from the tray, I pulled one of my jugs out of the neckline and leaned forward as if I was reaching for something. The reaction was instantaneous. Angela, you might want to cover up," he smiled. There was no other reaction. There was no tint in his pants and no frenzied need to get away. He wasn't flustered or embarrassed, and he was still cheerful. As we ate, my mind worked overtime. We were starting to discuss one of our two sticking points when I figured it out. "Angela, we both know that your baby isn't mine," he said. "So I don't see any reason to delay the divorce until the baby is born. I have an idea. They now have an early DNA test they can perform. It's very accurate and very safe. Let's get that done. That way, if the baby isn't mine, we could have this wrapped up by as early as next week. And if it is, we can discuss custody and child support in real-world terms." "What do you mean custody and child support?" I snapped. "Lucas, this is your baby. We don't have to discuss custody because when he's born or she's born, we're both going to raise our baby together. We'll put all of this Jerry and Tanya bullshit behind us and go on with our plans to have a family. So if that's what it takes to put this shit behind us, I'll make an appointment today." He just smiled and said, "Great, Angela. Do that. Isn't it a wonderful day?" My eyes widened in shock. It all came clear then. The first time that Lucas and I had sex, and any time we tried something new, he always walked around on her afterwards. It was as if his heart was just filled with love, and it made everything seem perfect to him. "Lucas, what the hell are you talking about?" I asked. "It's 95 degrees out and the skies are gray. It's going to rain and make it even muggier. There's a flash flood warning for the low-lying areas." "I know," he said, smiling. "But for a hot, muggy day when it's probably going to rain, it's a good one." "Lucas," I said, "rain means you can't drive your precious car, honey." Lucas not only put the Mustang up in the winter, he didn't drive it on days when it rained or there was water left over from a storm. He worried about rust and corrosion on his undercarriage. "I can always drive it tomorrow," he said, smiling. In the past, I'd known Lucas to sulk like a little kid on summer days that he couldn't drive those cars. I knew then that he'd screwed that little 304. I'm kind of tired, Lucas, I said. We got a lot done today. I'll make the appointment for tomorrow. I just want to take a nap, okay? Okay, he said, way too damn cheerfully. As soon as he left the room, I started crying quietly. All of my mistakes were coming home and bringing the realization of my foolishness with them. This was far worse than anything I'd ever imagined. Lucas had looked at my naked breast and basically told me to stick it back in my shirt. Before this, he didn't even have to see them to go after them. Remembering old days and so many others only caused me to compare it to the sex I'd had with Jerry, and goddammit, there was no way it was a fair trade. All sex with Jerry had given me had been the excitement of doing it and the risk of getting caught. The sex itself wasn't even very good. Lucas prided himself on fairness. How the hell was this fair? The worst thing about it was that it made me realize how vulnerable I was. Tanya had obviously stepped outside of what I'd perceived her boundaries were. True, I had goaded her into it, but she had responded and had taken our battle to a higher level. My only chance now was the fetal DNA test. I was sure that Lucas was my baby's father. I also knew that Lucas wanted to have kids very badly. The sooner I could let him know that he was going to be a father, the sooner we could get Tanya out of his life. Lucas might be willing to move on without me, but he'd never abandon his child. And as soon as the first one was out, I'd start pressuring him to make another one. Neither of us wanted to raise an only child. Kids need brother and sisters. 2 weeks later, my life went to hell. Actually, I was already in hell. I just went to a deeper level. I'd adjusted to my nausea and weakness in the morning and had started trying to reciprocate the compassion Lucas had shown me. I woke up and made breakfast for him some days now. We were scheduled to go in that morning to hear the results of the DNA test. Both of us were going. We both insisted on it. I wanted Lucas to be there so we could get things back to normal as soon as possible. And Lucas wanted to be there because he didn't trust me. He wanted to hear the results from the doctor in person. Anyway, I was going to the kitchen to make breakfast for Lucas when I heard the sound of pots and dishes. I smiled, thinking that Lucas had beaten me to the punch and was making breakfast for me. Maybe we could cook it together like we'd done in the old days. I walked into the kitchen and there she was. Tanya had on one of Lucas's old t-shirts. She probably didn't have anything on under it. Even without a bra, her jugs dwarfed mine. A t-shirt is supposed to be formless, but somehow she made the shirt look appealing and sexy. I always thought that my legs were my best feature, but hers were so tan and so curvaceous that I just wanted to run away. She looked up as I entered the kitchen and said, "Sorry, I wanted to have breakfast with Lucas before I head into work." She didn't smirk. She didn't give me a sarcastic smile or anything like that, but it was obvious. She was simply throwing the fact that she was screwing my husband in my face. And unlike my fling with Jerry, they weren't just having 10-minute quickies in a cheap motel. They were making love to each other all night long and actually sleeping together. I left the kitchen and went back up to my room. The sex, I could handle. I had to, because I'd started this whole thing. In my mind, I'd thought that he'd screw her a few times and we'd be even. It might even be good for us in the long run because Lucas having sex with her would take some of the sting out of my cheating. I guess I thought that after the test today, he'd simply tell her that it had been fun, but it was time for them to go their separate ways. Lucas sleeping with her was too intimate. I hated that more than them having sex. I never slept in a bed all night with Jerry. I never had him wrap his arms around me and hold me while I slept. That wasn't Jerry's job or his place. That would have been too weird. The only man I ever wanted to do that with was Lucas. He was taking this whole thing too far. Then I thought that maybe he was getting a different type of payback against me. Maybe he had thought of all the times that I'd screwed Jerry and then came home and had Lucas cuddle me at night. That had to be a slap in his face to have his wife go out and screw another guy, and then come home and expect him to cuddle her to sleep. God damn it, I was so stupid. Another thing that went through my mind was why Lucas would ever want to have sex with me again. Every time he looked at me, he'd be faced with two facts. The first one was that another man had screwed me for over a month. I'd heard that to some men, even if it only happened once, they just never wanted to be with that woman again. It was okay for them to go out and screw some other man's woman, but once their wife screwed someone else, she was damaged goods. The second thing was why Lucas would ever want me again if he could have Tanya. My body simply couldn't compete with her on any level. While it was true she was several years younger than I am, my body didn't look like that when I was her age or even younger. The only appeal I'd had for Lucas was the fact that he loved me so much and I'd practically destroyed that by cheating on him. I still had a few cards up my sleeve, but my options were becoming more limited every day. Today's DNA test was my big gun. When the doctor moried Lucas, it would be a slam dunk for me. For those of you who don't recognize the term moried, it's one of those new terms that are constantly being recognized by the dictionary. Morying refers to the act of being told that you are the father, like Maury does on his TV show. So when Lucas gets moried this morning, I'll breathe a sigh of relief and start planning the rest of my Tanya-free life. I will become the best wife and the best mother on the planet. I will never look at another man. I will not so much as allow the preacher to kiss me on the cheek after he baptizes one of my children from now on. Lucas will think I'm afraid of men. Except for Lucas himself, I'll become so dickophobic that Lucas will have to change our baby's diapers if it's a boy. Of course, as I climbed the stairs to go cry in my room, things got even worse. What could possibly be worse than the pictures I was imagining of Lucas screwing Tanya? The phone rang when I got into the bedroom. It was the sheriff calling. He wanted to know whether or not I knew where Tanya was. "Yes, Sheriff," I said. "She's here." "It figures," he said. "I called her 5 times last night, and she didn't go home. Either that, or she was too busy to pick up her goddamn phone. Could you tell her to bring you in with her this morning?" "Sure, Sheriff," I said, trying to be polite and helpful the way I'd promised. "I really hate doing this," he said. "The DA is going to formally charge you this morning." "Charge me with what?" I screamed. "He wants to throw the book at you," said the sheriff. "He's going to charge you as an accessory to murder in Ted's case. He's also trying to get you charged as a conspirator in the robbery, and he even wants to make you an accessory in your own shooting." I couldn't think of anything to say. There was dead silence over the phone line. "I'm sure you're too smart to try to run, right?" he said. "I mean, you're pregnant. Plus there's the fact that Tanya is right there with you. And also the fact that running would only make you look guilty. You have a good chance of getting off. The only evidence they have against you is Shorter's word." "Sheriff, could you please get them to do this later in the day, or even tomorrow?" I said. "I have a very important doctor's appointment this morning. It's been scheduled for over 2 weeks." "Yeah, let's let that horse's bum be the one who has to wait for a while this time. Just give me a call, and let me know if it'll be later today or tomorrow." "I'm sorry again," he said, and as he hung up the phone, I got the idea that he really was. A few hours later, I was really nervous as I sat in the doctor's office and waited for her to come in. I'd known my doctor for a very long time. She was a jolly chunky woman in her mid-50s with a house full of kids of her own. "It's about time you two got started," she said. "After all of these years of whining and telling me you had to wait until you hit a certain age or had enough money to have kids, I was going to tell you both to either shit or get off the pot." I laughed nervously. "You're smart though," she continued. "It's a good idea to get a full DNA workup for the baby very early so we can spot any possible anomalies. It also makes me feel good because most of the time when I do DNA profiles, it's usually one teenager trying to prove that another is the father of her baby. It's good to see that married couples who are happy can use modern technology too. Can we just have the results?" I asked. "Boy, are we snippy today?" she smiled. I was at the point where I was seriously thinking about kicking her jolly fat bum and just taking the envelope. "Okay, what do you want to know?" she asked. "I don't see any possible markers for any type of infant disease or any fetal DNA anomalies. It looks like you're going to have a very healthy baby." "Doctor, does the baby look like it will inherit more of my family's genetic characteristics or Angela's?" asked Lucas. Again, I realized how smart he was. He'd gotten to the gist of the matter without being base or classless. "Let me check," said the doctor. Her eyes got really big. There's no other way to say this," she said. "The baby can't possibly be Angela's. Is she acting as a surrogate mother?" Lucas and I looked at each other crazily. He took my hand to try to calm me down. I felt great to have him touching me again for the first time in what seemed like years. "Oh, sorry," said the doctor. "I mixed up your samples. Angela is indeed the mother. But, oh my. "Don't worry about it, doctor," said Lucas. My heart lurched in my chest. I almost thought it would stop beating. "Was there some kind of accident?" asked the doctor. "Were you assaulted?" Lucas thrust my hand away from him like it was covered in flaming shit. "Yeah, doc," he said. "There was an accident." "Well, it really doesn't matter who the biological father is," began the doctor. "Or the biological mother either. What matters is that the child is loved and cared for, right?" "Exactly," said Lucas loudly. We left the doctor's office with me on the verge of tears. As we got back in the Jeep, Lucas didn't even look at me. I looked across the seat from him and realized that he was as close to tears as I was. I realized then that without meaning to, I'd hurt him again. Having kids was always one of the dreams that Lucas and I shared. He'd been so close to fatherhood he could taste it, only to have me snatch it right back out of his mouth. It was like pulling a lollipop out of a child's mouth before he even gotten a lick. What made it worse was the doctor's stupidity. Even though Lucas had been sure my baby wasn't his, this doctor had told him that he was a father only to yank it back moments later. When Lucas had reached for my hand, I'd been sure that we were going to get back together. "Luke, we can raise this baby together," I said. I grabbed his hand and wouldn't let go of it. "Look, I can have this one taken care of, and we can make another one together. That one will be our baby just like we planned." "That would be like you," he snapped. "Killing an innocent child just to cover up what you did to us. It's so easy for you to say, 'Screw it, we'll make another one.' Sometimes I wonder if I ever really knew you, Angela." We drove in silence for a while. "I'll be expecting you to honor your promise," he said. "We already signed the divorce papers. I'll have my lawyer submit them to the court. Your half of my savings will give you enough money to live on for a few years. It would last longer than that if you do move in with your mom. You'll be able to get your baby started out in life in a good way. I don't begrudge you the money, Angela. Take it in good conscience for all the years that we had together before you ruined us. But I need some kind of closure and to move on with my life. So please find someplace else to live. Because honestly, seeing you every day still hurts me a little." I didn't even bother to reply. I was so close to having him back. When he grabbed my hand, it had told me everything I needed to know. It was time for Plan B. I'd given it some serious thought since the day that I'd found out he was screwing that 304. I'd signed the divorce papers, although I didn't agree with them because I knew that I'd need the money. Lucas would be giving me over $150,000. It would come in handy. Of course, I'd pay 100 times that amount to have Lucas back, so spending the money wouldn't hurt me at all. He could always make more money, but I couldn't replace Lucas if I tried. As soon as we got to the house, I called the sheriff's department and asked for Tanya. When she came on the line, she was shocked that I'd called her. "What do you want, Mrs. Blue?" she asked guardedly. "You may as well call me Angela," I said. "You won, Tanya. We got the results today. Lucas needs you right now, and I need to ask you a favor." "Let me get this straight," she said. "You're calling me to come and comfort Lucas?" "Yes," I said sadly. "And you need a favor from me?" she asked. "Yes," I said again. "What do you need?" she asked. She was a far better person than I was. I realized it then. If I had been in her position, I'd have burned her without thinking about it. If Lucas had been the father, the first thing I'd have done was to make him swear never to see that witch again. We'd probably have moved out of the town within weeks. "Your uncle says that the main reason that the DA wants to charge me is because of Jerry's testimony," I said. "Would it be possible for you to arrange a meeting between us so I can talk to him? He really isn't telling the truth about me helping to plan the robbery. There's also the fact that I need to tell him that he's going to be a father." "I'm sure I can do that for you, Angela," she said. "Tell Lucas I'm on my way." And Angela, she threw in, "I'm really sorry. Let's listen the story from Jerry's perspective." I was shocked when they told me I had a visitor. I couldn't think of anyone in this town who'd want to visit me. I was even more surprised when they moved me to one of the small interview rooms and chained my feet to the floor. This wasn't like a visit from my lawyer, where they just let him interview me through the bars of my cell. I sat down at a table. There were no bars in the room. There was a table and 2 chairs, nothing else. That little hot witch, the deputy, walked into the room and took off my handcuffs. "Ooh, baby, are we going to do it right here?" I asked. She looked behind her to make sure the door was closed. I was still wondering what Miss Hotness would want with me. She turned around and smiled at me and brushed her hair out of her eyes. Then, before I could react, she slapped the shit out me. "First off, murderer," she hissed. "Don't call me your baby. I can't wait until you fry. I took your cuffs off as a courtesy. Let me see your hands." I held my hands out and she put the cuffs back on. "You acted like an a-hole," she said. "So you don't deserve any courtesy." There was something different about her. It was as if she couldn't stop smiling. She actually wasn't even thinking about me. She was distracted somehow. She walked to the door and opened it. I was totally blown away when Banana Tits walked into the room. Her tits seemed to be a bit bigger than I remembered them. Maybe they were a bit fuller too. But she wasn't in the same class as Miss Hotness. She sat down across the table from me. "Jerry, I need you to do something for me," she said. "Why would I do anything for you?" I asked. "For reasons," she said. "Wow," I said. "That's a lot of reasons. What are they?" "First off, because you love me," she said. I tried really hard not to laugh. This which was stupid. I shot her in the head and she thought I loved her. "Secondly, because I'll get you out of here," she said. I started smiling at her and changed my expression to the same sappy lovesick one I'd used when I was screwing her. "Third, because I'll give you $100,000, she said. I was all ears by then. "And lastly, because I'm carrying your baby," she rubbed her stomach as she said it. I could tell she was looking to see my reaction. I tried to smile even wider because I was sure she wanted to think that it was happy news for me. In actuality, I really didn't care. I don't know why the cow was calling it my baby. The little monster was growing in her stomach, not mine. She'd better go back to her hubby and try to palm her puppy off on him. But the rest of it, the part about getting me the screw out of here and $100,000, it all sounded great. With $100,000, I could make it to Mexico. There was no extradition from there. After a while, the heat would be off of me and I'd buy myself a new identity and come back. "Baby, you had me at I love you," I said. "I just wish I wasn't wearing these cuffs so I could rub your tummy." "Why did you tell them that I was part of it?" she asked. "I knew that you'd only shot me to make it seem like we didn't know each other. So why tell them that I was a part of it?" I looked at the floor and gave her an Oscar-winning performance. "You're right, honey," I said. "I shot you to throw them off of our trail and protect you. But those cops play mind games. First they told me that you died and I went a little bit crazy. Then they told me that you were fine and they were just screwing with me. They told me that you were back with Mustang Man. Then they showed me pictures of you riding around town with him. They asked me how it felt to have my woman screwing some other guy every night. "You're mine, Angela," I said. She just looked at me. I could tell she was buying it. How stupid could she be? Really? "I have to admit this, honey," I said. "I was jealous. I mean, that kitty is mine. So I made up that stuff about us planning the robbery together so they'd put you in jail too, and maybe we could be together. I am sorry." I searched her face for further traces of stupidity and found them. She actually had the look on her face that a good con man tries to hide when he's found a mark. She thought that she was going to con me, the which was even stupider than I gave her credit for. "What do you need me to do, honey?" I asked. "First," she said, "I need you to tell them that I didn't do it. They don't believe you anyway, but that way I won't have to waste part of our money paying a lawyer." I nodded my head because I already knew that that part was true. The old cowboy sheriff told me I was lying every day, so giving her that wouldn't cost me anything. "After that, I'll put the money together," she said. "You'll need it mostly in cash and a few money cards. The money cards will help you get gas or things like that, or to reserve motel rooms over the phone. Of course, you'll have to get away by yourself. If we were together at first, they'd be able to find us easier, especially since dragging a pregnant woman with you would only slow you down. I'll join you wherever you end up after our baby is born and can travel." I nodded as if I believed her. "As we escape, I need you to do one thing on your way out," she said. "It will prove to me that you really do love me and our child." "Anything, honey," I said. "I told you a long time ago I'd do anything for you. Remember how you proved your love for me by trying to protect me during the robbery?" I nodded. "Well, I need you to do the same thing for that female deputy who just left the room. Only, baby, don't miss." I knew then that she wanted me to kill the deputy. "I won't miss her, honey," I said, "but everyone else around here will. I'll drill her right between the eyes." She blew me a kiss since the table was so wide that we couldn't touch. "Tell them today," she said. "I'll start getting the money together tomorrow morning. Hopefully, by the weekend you'll be free as a bird." I knew then exactly what was going on. That which was crazy. The real reason she wanted to help me get out and to pay me wasn't because she loved me. She was trying to use me. The real thing that she wanted was that little gray-eyed deputy dead. The deputy was the same ball of hotness I'd seen drooling over Banana Tits' husband at the race. Hubby had caught me and Banana Tits together the next day. He was probably on the verge of leaving her for the hot deputy. The baby probably wasn't even mine. She was even using the rug rat she was carrying to try to suck me in. Well, I'll go along with parts of her plan anyway, I thought. A few minutes after she left, Deputy Hot Pants came back into the room. As she and another deputy put me in leg irons and released my chains from the floor so I could go back to my cell, I asked her if the sheriff was available. "I'll send him to your cell," she told me. A short time later, he arrived in all of his sheriff-y goodness. He looked at me like it was still the days of the Old West and I was a notorious horse thief or bank robber. I guess it wasn't too far from being true. "What the hell do you want now?" he asked. "I want to tell the truth," I said. Even as I said it, I slipped into acting mode. I hunched my shoulders and looked down at the floor and then back up at him. My face, especially my eyes and my body language, all seemed to say that I had seen the light and I was really sorry. I even felt a wave of compassion from him, the old sucker. He started right away asking me questions. I answered all of them. It was easy because I was actually telling the truth. It felt really weird to tell the truth. So I did mix in a few lies just to stay in practice. Like when he asked me about Banana Tits' husband. I told him that I'd never seen him and hadn't known who he was until the day he broke my nose and my ribs. I'd actually seen that scumsucker the day before at the race. After an hour, in which he asked me the same questions over and over again and even brought another even stupider man into the room with us, I could tell he was winding down. "So what you're saying is that Mrs. Blue wasn't a part of your crew. She knew nothing about your intentions and she was actually a victim?" asked the other man, who turned out to be the district attorney. "Yep, she was just dumb kitty," I said, smiling. The DA's face soured at my expression. I originally wanted to take her dumb witch down with me. I figured that if we spread the responsibility for the crimes over 2 or more people that I'd get a lighter sentence. "So I lied to you. What changed your mind?" asked the sheriff. "I found out today that I'm going to be a father," I said. "I had a terrible childhood. Growing up, I never had a chance for a good life. I was an orphan from a broken home, and I had to fight to survive on the streets to keep abusive family members from molesting me. I was throwing out every hokey stereotype and cliche I could think of. I don't want my kid to have the kind of life I had," I said. I wiped away an imaginary tear from my eye as I said this. "So the first thing I have to do is tell the truth, so the little scumsucker isn't born in jail." My voice broke just enough as I said that last part. "I hope that his mom and her husband can raise him, or her. It might be a girl, who knows. Anyway, I want some good people to raise my kid. And maybe someday when the kid is old enough." "Well?" I let my voice trail off. "Well, what?" asked the sheriff. I could tell that I had both him and the DA sucking the fumes from my exhaust. They were buying this shit totally. I really could have been an actor. "Well," I continued, "if I don't get the chair, maybe someday when the kid is old enough to understand, they could bring him for a visit." They both looked at each other and shook their heads. Then I went for the gold. "No," I screamed and started crying. "No, no, no, never." The sheriff was still shaking his head. The DA came over and patted me on my shoulder. "No, what, son?" he asked gently. "Don't let them bring him for a visit. I don't want my kid exposed to someone as evil as I am. I deserve to be locked away forever in the deepest pit of the darkest corner of hell. Just give my kid a chance for a good life, and it'll all be worth it." I thought they were going to cry. Shit, I thought they were going to let me out, right then and there. Boy, were they saps. Meanwhile, Angela. Over the next few days, I suffered through a series of small heartbreaks, one after another. Even the changes that were going on in my body brought me no consolation. For most of my adult life, this was what I dreamed about. I was going through a pregnancy that should have been filled with love and even more affection and attention from Lucas. Instead, I was enduring it knowing that the father of the child I carried was a lying, murdering, bank robbing, con man. When I'd gone to see him in the jail, I'd been torn. I really didn't know at that point whether I should take the love that Jerry, or whatever his name was, professed for me, or continue to try and get Lucas back. Of the two, I knew that I loved Lucas far more, and that he'd be a much better father if he could ever get over the circumstances of our child's conception than Jerry ever could be. Even when Jerry told me that he loved me and wanted to be with me, there was a sense of coldness to his flowery words, and I just couldn't feel anything from him. I kept going back to that moment at the doctor's office when Lucas had taken my hand. There was more love and compassion in that one gesture than I felt in all of my combined experiences with Jerry. This was, of course, my fault, so I knew I had to roll the dice and go with what came up. My plan was very simple. The sheriff's department was set up for holding prisoners, but only for short-term stays. It wasn't really a jail or a prison. It was a pretty amateurish operation. I was sure that I could help Jerry to escape. I had several possible options for what to do once he was out. The most important and palatable option for me would be if Jerry killed Tanya. That was the biggie. That would be the event that would set my world back on its axis. Lucas would be devastated. He'd need someone to help him get over the tragic loss of the woman he'd gotten involved with. Who better than the woman he'd loved for most of his adult life? In the process, he'd help me through the rest of my pregnancy, and eventually we'd get back together. In a perfect world, that's how things would work out. Of course, there'd probably be loose ends to deal with. Jerry might be one. What would happen if he decided to come back for me and his child? I'd deal with that when it came up. More than likely, I'd set up a meeting and report him to the police. If he came without warning, I was sure that Lucas could handle him. He'd made short work of Jerry at that motel. I was sure that he'd do even worse to Jerry if his wife and child were in danger. So every day I went through the motions. I showed Lucas brochures or pictures of places I was going to go and look at. Lucas had actually written me a check for my share of the money. The thing that hurt me the most, though, was dealing with Tanya. She was constantly after me. She acted as if we were friends. How the hell could I be friends with the woman who was doing her goddamned best to take my man away from me? She asked me all kinds of stupid questions about things he liked to eat or how he liked things cooked. She actually even hinted around that if I didn't mind, could I give her a few of the recipes for things he really liked. She acted like a love-sick schoolgirl. Then things got worse. She actually started helping me with things for the baby. We actually had a few instances where we talked. The truth was that my life was a cakewalk compared to hers. She'd been in several abusive relationships, and her marriage to a serial cheater was more than I could have endured. Being built the way she was, she'd always had attention from guys. Usually, it was the more confident guys who had the guts to go after her. Most of them turned out to be a-holes. All they wanted to do was get her like she was some kind of award or trophy. Once they'd planted the flag, she became property just like any other woman. Her husband had been the worst of the bunch. He'd repeatedly cheated on her, and finally, when she caught him the last time, he told her that he thought they should have an open marriage. When she filed for a divorce, he'd beaten her nearly unconscious. Even her police training was no match for a guy who at 240 pounds was nearly double her weight. After the divorce went through, she'd moved here to work with her uncle and had totally sworn off men for life. If only she hadn't met Lucas, we probably could have been friends. She actually was a really nice woman. Her personality and Luke's were so similar it was like they were made for each other. She too loved the small town life, and she confessed her jealousy over my pregnancy. There were some things that it took her a while to get comfortable telling me, but once we got past a few barriers, she didn't hold much back. There were so many things that I didn't need to hear about, like the fact that the first time they were together, Lucas had eaten her until she passed out. All of the other guys couldn't seem to get past her TNA enough to actually try to please her. She also told me that when this was all over, she'd give Lucas 3 months to ask her to move in with him. After that, she was going to take matter into her own hands. How stupid could the woman be? Didn't she realize that I loved him too? Why would she tell me that she wanted him all the time, and that it was me who actually pushed them into having sex? She had, friendly or not, simply made me more intent on taking her off the table. During that time, I also made it a habit to go and visit Jerry every day. The sheriff's department became a normal place for me to be. I gradually got to know all 4 of the employees. The sheriff was a no-nonsense guy. If he was there, my plan wouldn't work. Tanya, of course, was normally a good deputy, but she was distracted by the newness of her love for my husband. Jimmy and Dave were both pretty much farm boys without farms. They were both too lazy for farming and had no skills for any other type of work, so working for the sheriff was perfect for them. Usually, the 4 rotated shifts and assignments, with 2 of them patrolling and 2 in the office. The 2 in the office had to watch any prisoners who were there and handle all of the calls that came in and any paperwork. Usually when I visited Jerry, I'd take some food for whoever was in the office. Over the course of a week or 2, I found out what they liked. That was important information. Jerry got in the habit of asking me all kinds of questions about the baby. He'd also hinted that on the day that we got him out, the first thing he wanted to do was screw every hole in my body. I told him I'd make sure he got the chance. In reality, I was thinking that he probably wouldn't be able to spare the 10 minutes it would take him to do that. I also got a chance to really take a look at Lucas during that time. Things had settled down between us to the point that he'd actually moved into one of the bedrooms in the house. He was very kind to me, and it hurt badly. He treated me like he'd treat anyone else, but the intimacy we'd always shared was gone. The way he'd always come up behind me and wrap his arms around me and gently kiss me or stroke my arm and just smile at me, those kinds of actions belong to Tanya now. It tore my heart out to see them laughing and splashing water on each other while they washed his Mustang, and especially to hear her moaning and calling my husband's name for hours at a time each night while they thought I was asleep. The worst part, though, was seeing that Lucas hadn't changed. The way he treated her was the same way he'd always treated me. Well, there were a few differences. He'd never let me drive either one of his Mustangs. She'd driven the green one several times, and the older black one seemed to be her car now. To tell the truth, I'd never taken any interest in his cars. Okay, I'll admit it. I was actually jealous of those things. But I wasn't nearly as jealous of those cars as I was of Tanya. Every time I caught him running his hand gently down her back and grabbing her heart-shaped booty, I wanted to strangle that witch. Every time she thought no one had noticed while she rubbed those jugs on him, as if it was an accident, I wanted to scream at both of them. I wanted to yell at her to keep her nasty body parts off of my husband. And I wanted even more to scream at him that it should be me he was feeling on. It should be my jugs that were being rubbed all over him. He should be gently rubbing my stomach and getting to know our baby. And it should be me he was making love to every night, not some bimbo from the sheriff's department. The sheriff told me that the federal authorities were ready to move forward on Jerry's trial. They'd finally caught his friend Arnie in another state. Unlike Jerry, Arnie had been lying low and had supposedly given up on the whole bank thing after Jerry got caught. The only way they caught him was because he was using some of the smaller bills from one of their previous robberies to live on. Most banks track the serial numbers, or at least lot numbers of their bills. So after a robbery, even if the bills aren't marked, they can sometimes be tracked. A bank employee in Arkansas with nothing else to do was responsible. He had made a habit of paying attention to the lists of not only bank robbers that the FBI put out, but the lot numbers from banks that had been robbed. When he came across one of those lot numbers in a deposit from a local 7-Eleven, he'd notified the FBI. They staked out the 7-Eleven and put an agent there working as a cashier. They didn't know who the person was, but they'd had a general description and security footage from several of the robberies. So when Arnie showed up trying to buy beer with a few more small bills, they had him. The feds were going to take custody of Jerry on Monday, so on Friday, I made my move. The timing was perfect. The sheriff and Dave were out patrolling. I brought a big platter of tacos and burritos for Jimmy. "My God," he said, "even I can't eat that much. Tanya, you'll probably have to eat 1 or 2 of these." "Oh no," she said. "I have to watch my weight. I don't need my bum to get any bigger than it already is." Jimmy, who was normally very shy, let his thoughts slip in his excitement over the food. "Shit, every guy in town watches your weight for you, Tanya. Your bum is perf." He stopped abruptly when he realized that we could hear him. "Sorry," he said, with an embarrassed look on his face. "I didn't mean to insult you." "That's the way I'll take it," said Tanya. "Come on, Angela. I'm sure you want some time with your friend." The usual procedure was for her to move Jerry from his cell with him, wearing both leg irons and handcuffs. Then she'd move him into the interview room and chain his feet to the large iron hasp in the floor. After that, if he'd been behaving himself, she'd uncuff his hands. With his feet chained to the floor, he couldn't move out of the chair that was also bolted to the floor, except to stand. After he was situated, she'd come and take me into the interview room. During the first few times that we'd done this, whoever was in the office would watch the procedure from a distance, just in case. Lately that hadn't been happening. Jerry had been doing his part. He'd been using all of his skill as an actor to convince them that he'd turned over a new leaf. I knew the drugs that I added to Jimmy's food would go to work quickly, but I still waited for a while. Jerry and I talked the way we usually did. We mentioned things like visits in the prison he was going to and other things that we thought might be normal. Tanya often passed by the room or slipped in to make sure that everything was on the up and up. On her last visit that morning, I let her hear me tell Jerry that I was hoping in the prison he went to that they'd allow him to have conjugal visits, because hearing her and Lucas going at it for hours at a time had me really horny. The look on her face as she ducked back out of the room was from pure embarrassment. The look on Jerry's face as he looked at her was pure lust. I was sure that he hadn't noticed that I'd seen it. I called Tanya back into the room and started asking her when Jerry would be moved. She told me that she couldn't give me that information because of the security risk. At that same time, Jerry asked her if she knew about whether or not he'd be able to have private time with loved ones in the prison he was going to. Tanya was still flustered, remembering what we'd talked about before. As she looked up at Jerry to answer his question, I was sure the witch was imagining Lucas screwing her when I clubbed her over the back of her head as hard as I could. I took the ring of keys off of her belt. She, as per procedure, hadn't carried her gun into the room. I was really nervous as I threw the keys to Jerry, and he quickly removed the chains on his legs. He rushed over to me and held out his hands. I uncuffed him and tried to hug him. He pushed me away from him and said, "First things first." Even before he had a chance to say anything else, we heard the sheriff's voice over the radio trying to reach anyone at the station. "I'm on my way in," he said. Jerry looked at me, and I knew he was thinking about doing something. "Stick to the plan," I hissed. He reached for Tanya, and to my surprise, he started trying to undo her shirt. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. "We have to kill her and then get out of here." "I'm gonna screw her," he said. "Then you can kill her. You're the one who wants her dead. So you do it." We heard Jimmy groaning in the front of the office. "Shit, I have to get out of here," he said. "What about your promise?" I asked. "What about your love for me and our baby?" "Oh yeah," he said, using that wonderful smile of his. I almost forgot. It was so fast that I don't remember him moving. Jerry hit me so hard I went down like a bowling pin. Once I was down, he didn't stop. He started kicking me in the face, in the stomach, anywhere he could reach. I instinctively rolled into a ball to protect my baby. "Stupid witch," he kept yelling. "I never felt anything for you. You were always just dumb kitty. You're just too stupid to believe. I never even liked you. I had to take Viagra to get me excited enough to even screw you." He kicked me in the head one more time and ran out of the room. He took Jimmy's gun and a bunch of keys. There were only a couple of cars in the parking lot. I don't know which one he took. I was very close to losing consciousness as Tanya, who just barely regained consciousness, crawled over and checked on me. "Oh my God," she said. "We have to get you to a hospital." She got shakily to her feet and grabbed the phone in the office. The sheriff was on his way in. I heard her telling me that he'd be here in less than 5 minutes. The last thing I remembered was hearing her calling Lucas. I remember hearing her telling him that she was okay, and then I blacked out. Now let's listen the story from Lucas's perspective. I knew something was wrong when my phone rang. It was one of those moments that let us know that we're all linked somehow. Just before the phone rang, I was about to start running a new job on my house turning center. Something just seemed wrong though. I was about to check the part in the chuck to make sure it was seated against the stop correctly, and I just started thinking about Tanya. So when I picked up the phone, I was already in trouble mode. Her voice sounded rough, but she told me she was okay. She just had a bump on her head. She told me that Jerry had escaped and was probably on his way out of town. She thought that I should meet her at the hospital because Angela might be hurt. I asked her who had hit her. She told me not to worry about it. Just come to the hospital. Rage was coursing through me. Then she did it. She said the one thing that she probably shouldn't have said then. She said, "Honey, I love you. I was only scared that I'd never see you again. I thought that maybe he might have killed me and we wouldn't be together. But other than my blouse being open part way, he never touched me. Hurry up and get to the hospital, okay? I need a kiss like you wouldn't believe. I hung up the phone and ran into the house as quickly as I could. Knowing the town and the surrounding roads the way I did, I knew that Jerry would take the freeway to get out of town faster. It would take him about 10 minutes to get to my exit from where he was, since I was on the opposite side of the hospital from the sheriff's department. I went into my home office and fumbled with the keys to my safe. I took out my gun and loaded a clip into it. I cocked it to make sure there was one in the chamber and left the house. I got into my Mustang and quickly drove over to the freeway entrance ramp. I didn't have to wait very long before I saw Angela's Toyota screaming past me. It must have been doing about 80 miles per hour. Since Tanya had just told me that Angela had been hurt, I was sure it wasn't her driving it. Angela also would have been heading for the hospital, so there was no way she'd have driven past it to get here. I screamed down the ramp and onto the freeway after the car. I was angry as hell and I had the wrong idea in my head. When I started chasing the car, all I could think of was that the same scumsucker who'd ruined my marriage had hit Tanya. I really didn't care what he may have also done to Angela. She'd made her own bed, so she deserved to lie in it. But for putting his hands on Tanya, that scumsucker was going down. Catching the Corolla was frighteningly easy. 80 was probably as fast as that car could go. I was doing over 100 when I hit the bottom of the ramp and 130 before we'd gone a half mile. I pulled up behind the Corolla and swung out to the left. Jerry tried to speed up, but I had far more power than he did. I pulled up next to the car, lowered my window, and waved at him with a big smile on my face. He waved back. He obviously wondered why I was smiling at him. He was probably still wondering when I put 2 bullets in him and stepped on the gas. My Mustang shot forward as the Corolla slowed, and then lurched into a turn as Jerry lost control of it. The car flipped over several times in my rearview mirror as I braked and pulled over to the side of the road. The car I bought Angela when we were still in love was now a fractured, smoking piece of crap on the road. Well, let's face it. Even before it had been wrecked, it had never been a great car anyway. It was only a way to get from point A to point B. I don't think there are guys who dream of someday owning some crappy Econobox car. As several cars going in the opposite direction slowed to look at the wreck, I noticed Jerry's arm moving as he tried to drag himself out of the wreckage. I started walking quickly towards the wreck. As I got there, I noticed that several other motorists were on their way to the car. Jerry had crawled out of the car by then. "Get me away from here before it blows," he gasped. I could see that he was bleeding from his shoulder and biceps muscle on the driver's side. My 2 shots had hit him, but they were nowhere near fatal. I pulled my gun back out and stuck the barrel in his mouth. I shot him twice more, making sure this time there was blood and brain tissue all over me. Just to make sure, I emptied the clip in his chest as all of the would-be rescuers ran back to their cars to try and get the hell away from the crazy man. Like I said, some scumsucker just have it coming. I calmly walked back to my car and sat on the hood. I took the empty clip out of my gun and laid both of them on the ground a good distance away from the car. I pulled out my iPhone and called Steve. I told him where I was and that he should come and arrest me. He told me to stop talking crazy until I told him what I'd done and why. He said that he was going to drop Angela and Tanya off at the hospital, and he'd be there in less than 10 minutes. I asked him not to bring Tanya with him. I didn't want her to see me. Then I sat back to wait. It didn't take long. True to his word, Steve was there in less than 10 minutes. I got down off my hood and turned my back to him and raised my hands in the air, the way the cops always want criminals to do on TV. "Lucas, stop acting stupid," said Steve. "Tell me what happened." "That scumsucker hit Tanya," I said. "Steve, she was so scared on the phone. She thought she was worried about dying." I just snapped. I love her so much. I knew he'd have to pass by here to get away. So I waited for him and chased his car down and shot him. But the scumsucker still wouldn't die. So I made sure he could never bother Tanya again. He nodded. "Yep, you made good and goddamn sure of that," he said. "Where's the gun?" "It's over there on the ground." I pointed at it. I took the clip out of it. He ran over and got the gun and threw it in the trunk of his police car. I held out my hands for him to cuff me. "Will you put your hands down?" he snapped. Just then Tanya drove up and launched herself at me. "Tanya, go back to the hospital, please," I begged her. "You don't get to order me around," she snapped. "We're not married yet." "See, she's fine," said Steve. "Now go home. Or better yet, go to the hospital. I'm going to need you there when we question that lying which you used to be married to. I have a feeling that she had something to do with this. But when are you going to arrest me?" I asked. Tanya got between me and her uncle. "What are you going to arrest him for?" she asked. "Nobody is trying to arrest him, Tanya," he said. "God damn it. Get a grip, both of you." Tanya put her arm protectively around me. "Somebody owes me some kisses," she said. We both heard her uncle calling the DA. "Yeah," he said. "Nope, he didn't quite get away. I'm still going to have to wait until Mrs. Blue gets out of the emergency room and Jimmy wakes up to get the whole story about how this whole thing started, but Shorter is dead." "Yep, I'm sure. They don't get much deader. It looks like somebody stuck a gun in his mouth and blew the top of his head off. Then they unloaded about 4 or 5 times in his chest." "6, I whispered. "Make that 6 times in the chest," said Steve. I held up my hand and pointed to the arm and shoulder. "Yeah, they shot him in the arm a couple of times too. It looks like they really didn't like the scumsucker." He looked at me and whispered for me to burn the clothes I was wearing and flush the ashes down the toilet, and then clean the entire bathroom with bleach, twice. Tanya was looking at me like I was crazy. Her uncle told her to burn her clothes too, because she's gotten some of the blood on her when she hugged me. "Of course, I have a theory," said Steve into the phone. "The feds just caught that other scumsucker from the bank robbery. That still leaves one, and possibly more of them out there somewhere. They probably got the idea that Shorter had ratted out the guy we caught in Arkansas. You know how these people handle loose ends, especially rats." Steve gestured for us to get out of there. "Yeah, the witnesses are all from out of state. We can't go by anything they've said. None of them described the same guy. They all said the same thing about what happened, though. They drove by and saw a car flipped upside down. A guy walked up to the car and just started shooting the guy in the car. None of them hung around to see what happened after that. Unfortunately, none of them came in to fill out statements. Like I said, they were just random people driving down the freeway who stopped to help. I'm guessing they kept driving after calling in." "Well, no. Our recording machine didn't record the calls. We didn't know what was going on because we were so busy with what happened at the station. Why don't you come down there later while we look into it?" Then he hung up the phone. "Uncle Steve, what the hell is going on?" asked Tanya. I started to say something, but he held up his hand in the universal "shut up" gesture. "You heard what I told the DA," he said. "Some guy shot the shit out of Shorter. You guys go home and change clothes. Then come to the hospital. We'll all get to the bottom of what happened at the station, and then we'll talk afterwards." He looked me straight in the eye. "Lucas, do not say a word about what happened to anyone. I mean it." "Oh, all right. You can tell her. But don't talk about it around anyone. The 3 of us will discuss this later tonight. And try to act surprised when you get to the hospital, okay?" Tanya followed me to my house. She had clothes there to change into. We followed her uncle's instructions and burned and flushed our blood-covered clothing. Then we cleaned the bathroom and showered together before putting on fresh clothing. Of course, the shower took us nearly an hour, and we needed another shower once we got done. We drove to the hospital together and went to the room that Angela had been put in. Angela's injuries were all mostly just superficial bruises. She did have several lacerations and contusions and a big bump on her head. The baby was fine also. The sheriff stood over her bed glaring down at her while Tanya and I watched from across the room. "Mrs. Blue, if you start any of that amnesia or memory loss shit, you are going straight to jail this time," he said. "I was such a fool," she said. "And it's cost me everything." "We know you're a fool," snapped Steve. "Let's just hear the story." As usual, Angela started out trying to make it seem like she was a victim in the whole thing, but the facts didn't add up. Dave, the other deputy, arrived, and we watched the security video of the incident. There was no sound in the video because the ACLU had lobbied against certain violations of the prisoner's rights to privacy, but the video itself was clear. Steve had to hold me back when they came to the part of the video that clearly showed Angela herself was the one who'd clubbed Tanya. I was almost beside myself when I saw Jerry begin to take off Tanya's shirt. The DA decided then and there to charge Angela with assault and battery against a law enforcement officer and aiding and abetting a fugitive to escape. When the toxicology screens came back, he was sure he'd throw in more charges for drugging Jimmy. He'd also decided to reopen the charges against her from the bank robbery since he was sure that she'd schemed with Jerry to plan the whole escape in exchange for Jerry's testimony that she hadn't been a part of the bank robbery and Ted Granger's murder. That convinced him even more that she probably had been. It looked like Angela would be going to jail for so long that she'd die in prison, and then would have to be buried on prison grounds to serve out the rest of her sentence. She started singing like a canary to try to get a lessened sentence. She finally plea-bargained everything down to a flat 50 years behind bars in a medium security facility. She'd still be 85 when she got out, but at least she'd have hope. In a medium security facility, she would also be allowed regular visits from friends and family, so hopefully she'd be able to see her child grow up. In exchange for the sentence, Angela, with nothing to lose, told the truth. I was shocked at the level she'd stooped to. When she told us how she'd made Jerry promise to kill Tanya, I wished that I'd still had my gun. When the sheriff and the DA were done with her, Angela asked if Tanya and I would stay for a few minutes to talk to her. The sheriff reminded us that we had a talk of our own and that he'd be out at the house early the next morning. We nodded. I sat down in a chair and just stared at the woman I used to be married to. "Lucas, I need to ask the two of you a big favor," she began. "Why the hell would we do anything for you, Witch?" I snapped. At that moment, I could just as easily have killed her as had a conversation with her. Tanya calmed me down and wrapped her arm around me. She understood after the talk that we'd had exactly how far I'd go to protect her. "Why did you try to get that scumsucker to kill Tanya?" I asked. "Why couldn't the two of you just run off to Mexico together?" "Because I didn't love him," she said quietly, trying to hold back her tears. "Through all of this, Lucas, you're the only one I loved. I wanted us back together more than anything on earth. There was literally nothing I would not do even now to accomplish that. But over the past few months, it just seemed like every new development, every scheme I tried only served to push us further apart and you and Tanya closer together. Nothing I tried worked. I tried to tease you into seduction by letting you see me naked," she said. "All it did was goaded you into having sex with her. Nothing I tried worked. I love you, Lucas, and I want you back." Finally, I started to see that there was no way I could ever get you back while she lived. She loves you at least as much as I do, maybe more. She was always asking me stupid questions about how she could make you happy and what you like. She had to die. But that dumbass Jerry only wanted to get a chance to get his tool into her. I don't even know why. He was terrible in bed. It's like those dogs that chase cars down the road. What will they do with the car if they catch one? Tanya sat down on the bed next to Angela and held her hand as Angela cried. I just looked at her like she was crazy. "What do you want us to do, Angela?" she asked. "When my baby is born," said Angela, "I want the two of you to raise it. Maybe when he or she is old enough, you could come by for occasional visits. For the first few months, Angela, they'll probably let you keep the baby in the prison with you," said Tanya. "That will give Lucas and I time to discuss it." "We don't need time," I said to Tanya later. "Why did you even tell her that?" "That which has snapped. She's out of her mind." "Because I understand her," said Tanya. I just looked at her, rolled my eyes. Women, I thought. Tanya and I drove home and went straight to bed. It had been a rough day. While I showered, Tanya changed the sheets on the bed. We were soon fast asleep, wrapped up in each other's arms. We slept halfway through the morning the next day and didn't actually wake up until Steve knocked on the door. "Okay," he said, in his loud, booming voice. "Neither of you knows anything about what happened to Shorter. Neither of you were anywhere in the area when it happened. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. Any witnesses who call or come by the station will be told that we're already looking for the guy and don't need any further testimony." "But," I began. "But nothing," yelled Steve. "Shorter was a con man, a murderer, a bank robber, and a possible assaulter. Remember," he said, looking straight into my eyes. "He was going to try to have sex with my niece, your woman, while she was knocked out. He had it coming." "Okay," I said. "Good," he said. "What did your ex want?" "She wants us to raise her child for her," I said, "and bring it by to visit her." "I hear you," said Steve. "That will be one screwed up kid. It has a mother who's a pathological liar and solicits murder and assaults police officers. It also has a father who's a bank robbing, murdering. That kid's got criminal or psychotic DNA on both sides of its gene pool. Together, they'd be like some kind of homicidal version of the Addams family. It's too scary to think about. Tanya told her we'd think about it, I said. Why? Steve asked his niece. Because Angela really isn't that bad, said Tanya. I can understand her and how she feels. She was more a victim in this than a criminal. She started out this normal housewife who just made a mistake. Shit just started rolling downhill and picking up speed until she was doing things that she never would have done. But she could have gotten off at any time, I said. I gave her more than enough money to just start her life over after we divorced. But that's just it, dummy, said Tanya. You didn't offer her the one thing that she wanted. The one thing that could have ended this whole thing was never on the table, so she couldn't quit. All of her retarded schemes were because of that. In her place, I'd have done the same thing. Lucas, you and I haven't been together for nearly as long as you were with Angela, but I would already do anything, and I do mean anything, to keep us together. Uncle Steve, I have some bad news for you, she smiled. If it's bad news, why the hell are you smiling so much, little girl? Asked Steve. Because it's not bad news for me, she said. It's bad news for you. I'm retiring as of now. I'm getting married, and I have to start getting my house together. I have to redo a lot of things around here to make it more my house with my husband. You know, get the other woman's style out of here. Who are you marrying? I asked, smiling. You dummy, she said. Remember last night when I told you that I didn't have to listen to you because we weren't married yet? You never denied that we were getting married. So that can be taken as a de facto proposal in some states. You especially never denied it in front of the county sheriff, who is an elected official, so that makes it even worse. Then she stepped up on her toes and kissed me. She brushed her hair out of those big gray eyes and pouted. Don't you want to marry me? She asked in a tiny little voice. More than anything, I said, as Steve started laughing. God, she's already got you by the balls. Congratulations. Invite me to the wedding. We got married about 6 weeks later. It took that long for Tanya to plan the wedding and invite what looked like everyone in the state. We settled down over those first few months and were very happy. We were far happier than I'd ever been with Angela. Tanya did visit Angela in the Michigan women's prison several times, but I could never bring myself to go. A little while ago, I learned that Angela had given birth to a son and had named him Lucas for some reason that was beyond me. I guess it couldn't hurt anything since we still really didn't know what his father's real name was. And Jerry wasn't around to complain anyway. What shocked me even more was that Tanya started making changes around the house. It looked like she was setting up a nursery in one of the bedrooms. I didn't say anything because I knew that if she'd made up her mind, I'd give in. I loved her too much to deny her anything that would make her happy. She even forced me to go and visit Angela last week. She showed me Angela's baby and made me hold him. I had to admit that he didn't seem like some kind of homicidal maniac. But then I remembered that kid from The Omen seemed like a normal baby at first too. We sat there in front of Angela with Tanya holding the little demon child and me staring at him out of the corner of my eye, waiting for him to grow a tail or start making shit float in midair. Angela, we can't take him, said Tanya, but you'll be happy. I'm keeping my promise. I did find someone who really wants to give him a good home. Tanya got up and walked over to the door and brought an old woman into the room. The woman seemed familiar to me. Then I recognized her. It was Angela's mother. She'd be the perfect person to bring up Angela's child. Since Angela's father had passed, she was lonely and the child was her own grandchild. As we drove back home, I was relieved. I was sure that Tanya had been ready to take Angela's brat, and in some ways, maybe I was a little sad that we hadn't. How did you like my solution? Asked Tanya. It was perfect, honey, I said. It was the best way out of a terrible situation. You don't think I'd have been a good mother? She asked. You'd have been the best mother in the world, I began. But the kid would still have resented you. He'd have felt cheated and teased by you. She looked at me in shock. Why would he have felt like that? She asked. Okay, if you were a baby, I began. And your mom was walking around with these? I gave one of her jugs an affectionate squeeze. And then she fed you from a bottle. Wouldn't you feel cheated? She smiled. But it's also why we couldn't keep Angela's baby. There just wouldn't have been enough to go around. I don't know, I said. They're pretty big. Yeah, she smirked. But there are only 2 of them. So with you sucking on one and him sucking on the other, what would our baby do? I slammed on the brakes. My Mustang's 6-piston Brembo brakes brought us to a stop so quickly that we were both snapped back by our seatbelts. "We're having a baby," I said in shock. "Us? As in, you and me?" "That's the only us I know," she smiled. "Why did you think I've been setting up a nursery?" Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.